G'day YouTube, warbles not a lot here, just off for a bit of a ride on a Saturday afternoon. Leaving the oldest ranking queen swamp wallaby in charge of the clearing as we go off to enjoy the almost perfectly clear blue sky, which is not bad for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Apart from trying out the new gauntlets, prime function of today's ride is to see how far we go on the new speed controller. And the 61-kilometre return trip to the Deepwater Industrial Estate is probably the best benchmark I can come up with. Okay, so 7th of June 2025, going for a ride. So that means it's a pretty good excuse for episode 17 of the Trumpocalypse Chronicles. And matters have been proceeding at an alarming pace since I last recorded an episode. Essentially, the tariff war has blown up in America's face. Everybody has decided that, well, in terms of international investment advice, the acronym is ABUSER. Invest anywhere but USA. And Mr. Trump did not enjoy being told about the Wall Street financiers who'd tagged him taco as far as his trade policy is concerned, because they'd observed that he always chickens out. And then the Ukrainians demonstrated just what a restrained poker face their president had been presenting when Trump told him in the Oval Office that he had no cards. And at the time, his cards were about 160 drones in a whole lot of disguised prefabricated buildings. And at that point in time, they were probably in Kazakhstan waiting to be picked up by the contracted Russian truck drivers. So I don't know, 4 or 5 days ago we learned that Ukraine had taken out $7 billion worth of Russia's strategic long-range bomber force. They're claiming 41 destroyed, visually confirmed by satellite indications more like 28, perhaps 30 destroyed. The point is, they really only had about 120 serious long-range bombers on their books, and of those, a third would be grounded for really major overhaul maintenance, and a third would be grounded for sort of regular routine maintenance, and 1/3 would be actually ready to fly if you filled them up with fuel and loaded them with weapons. So the Ukrainians with their 116 drones launched. Some of the aircraft got multiple drones. They had a very cost-effective operation. None of the Ukrainians got captured. They didn't seem to hurt anybody because they got aeroplanes parked in the middle of nowhere. However, that means the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty terms and conditions suggesting that you've got to park your big bombers out in the open for satellite inspection may no longer be getting complied with by a few of the major players, but because the START treaty terms have been in force for a very long time, nobody's actually got much in the way of hangars to keep their big strategic bombers in. And it would be quite the costly sort of an exercise, apparently, to try and suddenly build them. And the Ukrainians could no doubt use drones to attack them too. Here we go, and we're doing 45 kilometres an hour on the new speed controller. For the record, the old speed controller performed its failure to proceed manoeuvre about 100 hours after I started riding the bike. And it did then go back to China with about 5 others, or 4 others. And they seemed to expect another 5 were going to fail because they sent 10 new speed controllers out to Australia. So I feel as if I've just been used as a beta tester by the Talaria Power Technology Company. And this new speed controller is absolutely rigorously law-abiding. It won't go faster than 46 kilometres an hour, so it's 6% slower on a full battery. When there's no room in the battery for any extra electricity, like when you've got more than 90%, you come to a big steep hill, it will not permit you to roll downhill faster than 47 kilometres an hour. No more of this going down under gravity at 52 or 53. And according to my range extrapolations from a couple of 46 kilometre rides, its absolute range down to 10% battery appears to have shrunk from 70 kilometres to 67. So 4% less range, 6% less top speed. I'm hoping where they've removed high efficiency source, they've replaced it with absolute reliability. But anyway, after wiping out a third of Russia's long-range strategic bomber force, then the Ukrainians set off a 1.1 tonne explosion underwater at the foot of the pilings supporting the high-level shipping arch on the Kerch Bridge. And as a old man who grew up as a teenager when World War II was the big flavour of everybody who was writing books and making movies, I sort of grew up understanding that if somebody puts an explosive in contact with a hard surface underneath a whole lot of water and sets the explosive off, you can't compress the water, so it focuses the explosion on the hard surface. So I was sort of laughing pretty hard when the Russian troll bots were suggesting that no damage was done. Yeah, there would have been a lot of damage done, but it would be to the concrete down near the seabed. So once again, when Mr. Zelensky, President Zelensky, was being told that he was not sufficiently grateful and he didn't have a suit on anyway and he didn't have any cards, he had a pretty full house and he was playing against a busted flush. So that all sort of made Trump look a bit stupid. And then the bromance with Elon fell apart. Elon was ceremoniously given a gold key to the White House. Looked like it come out of a Disneyland sideshow alley. He was sporting a black eye, which he blamed on his 5-year-old. And the only circumstance I can imagine under which a grown man would have a black eye after inviting a 5-year-old to punch him in the face would be if the grown man has had a bit of a temper tantrum and been acting out and they've waved their arms around and they've smacked or slapped the 5-year-old, and then they were begging and grovelling for forgiveness and they've got down on their bended knees and said, I'm sorry, here, you punch me in the face and make it even. That's the only possible scenario that I can imagine which would fit the narcissistic, egomaniacal personality of Elon Musk, and the idea that he asked the 5-year-old to punch him in the face, and then he said the 5-year-old is now back living with his mother, no longer functioning as a shield for Elon. Now here we are going down a hill at 46 kilometres an hour, full throttle. 97% of a battery. I would have been doing 49 or 50 down here once upon a time. So yeah, anyway, if I can get the chronology right, it was a day or two before Elon decided to call the big beautiful bill an abomination and say it was shameful to vote for it and it had to be stopped. And then Mr. Trump said that Musk just had the shits because there was a removed $7,000 subsidy for buying an electric vehicle, and that was going to hit Musk's companies pretty hard. And as he was saying that in the Oval Office, Musk tweeted that it was a lot of bullshit. He'd never seen the bill before it was published and passed. It was passed in the dead of night, boo-hoo and sob. And then Trump said, yeah, well, the easiest way to deal with that fella is just take away all of his government contracts. And as soon as he said that, Musk fired back, great, make my day, good job. I'll just decommission the Dragon program immediately. Which meant that if they took him at his word, no reason why not to, because he's been complaining that he doesn't want to make dragons and fly dragons because it takes away production capacity from the starships that he wants to build. So that would mean that NASA has no way to get to and from the International Space Station apart from Jeff Bezos's Origin brand of cargo ship that's not human rated. And they could go to the Soviets and ask for a ride on their grandfather's spaceships, which are still operational. Keeping my eye out for the sheep that are supposed to be on this hill. Anyway, now I'm 44, 45, 46, rolling down here without any throttle on. 95% of the battery. Now yeah, normally I would have gone down there at about 52 or 53. It's a very law-abiding little speed controller, this one. Yeah, so Elon threatened to take away SpaceX, and I think that was after he said that he was going to drop his big bombshell, which was that the reason the Epstein files have not been released is because Trump is on the Epstein files, which everybody sort of deduced by the behaviour of Bongino and Kash Patel. And Pam Bondi, because all three of them were very, very hot and bothered about the Epstein files and how they wanted to release them until they got in a position to look at them and saw how often Trump appears and where he appears and how he appears, and then they decided to only release all of the telephone numbers and shit that had already been released, and everything else is just too time consuming, and they haven't quite figured out how to do it yet. So overlaid around and about all of that, Stephen Miller's wife left him and went to work for Elon. Elon stopped following Steve Miller and stopped boosting him in the algorithm to all the right-wing lunatics who've been thinking that he's a good bloke, because he keeps getting boosted on their Twitter feed or X feed. And Steve Bannon, he's harping on the fact that Elon Musk, when he was 17 and run away from being conscripted in South Africa, he went to Canada because his mother was a Canadian, so he was a Canadian by birthright, even though he grew up in White South Africa. And then he went on his Canadian passport to America on a student visa, whereupon he started work in the form of forming a couple of companies and selling them at a profit. And then he applied for American citizenship from his student visa, and he wasn't permitted to work on the student visa. So Steve Bannon says he lied on his citizenship application, therefore he's not a citizen, doesn't, because he's an illegal immigrant and he should be deported. And I'd say once Trump gets through with processing, how big a hit it will be to NASA and the Department of Defence if they haven't got access to SpaceX and Starlink. I can't see any actual reason why Trump won't use his power as president to order SEAL Team 6 to go and arrest Mr. Trump and inform him that SpaceX and Starlink have been duly nationalised for national security reasons, and therefore he's going to be reaccommodated in San Salvador because it's the cheapest place to put an illegal alien who's been doing all sorts of bullshit and nastiness under Section Tiddly Pom Poo shit of the Defence of the Realm Act. I think poor old Elon's taken so much ketamine that he's just more than shot himself in the foot. He's bloody near shot both legs off at the kneecaps. And there was a New York Times article that said he admitted to some of his friends he'd taken so much ketamine that he was having bladder problems. I don't know, I've never taken ketamine. Heard a little bit about it. My understanding, based on some duly qualified medical person that I heard talking about it on YouTube, so it might be bullshit. The well understood medical problems that you get on ketamine is when you're taking so much for so long and you've been thrashing your kidneys as they try to excrete the stuff, or the metabolic breakdown products thereof, that you start pissing blood. It's not that you piddle yourself because you're too far out of your head. It's not that you can't piss. It's that you piss blood because your kidneys are rooted. So if Elon's got problems with ketamine, he's really got problems. Again, going downhill, full throttle, 90% battery, 46 kilometres an hour. They don't like making machines that disobey the law in China, apparently. So, meantime, that Diego Garcia fella who was never ever going to get back into America because Trump said so, and he had an arrangement with the president of El Salvador, he went back to America yesterday. Only now they say they're going to charge him with making multiple journeys backwards and forwards across the US and smuggling hundreds of illegal aliens. But no evidence of such has been presented and no charges have been laid. If I don't stand up on the foot pegs like that, my back wheel comes up and runs across my transverse strut and I wear my tyre out at about the 4,500 kilometre mark, because that's when the old tyre went away and the new tyre come on. "45 kilometres an hour at 12 kilometres out, 89% in the battery, 34 watt hours per kilometre going up this hill. And for the record, for anybody who's been paying attention to this for any length of time, I got my son to have a look at the manual and play with the regenerative braking settings, and I now know how to alter them at whim rather than have them do different things at random, because I didn't know what pushing the buttons was doing on the keyboard. It seems setting 1 there's almost no regenerative braking. Setting 4 there's so much it pitches you on your nose wheel when you roll the throttle off. I'm currently riding on setting 2 and it's sufficient that between the top of Martin's Lookout and Hunter Street you can pick up 2% of your battery capacity. But you sort of have to pick up the speed on the flat and dive into the descending turns. And sometimes you can go up to level 3, but level 2 seems to be comfortable. I should have got my son to have a look at that manual and explain it to me a year ago, hey? Have a laugh. So anyway, can you imagine how well or otherwise the American skyrocketry program will run if Musk gets put in jail and Trump's minions put themselves in charge of it? There we go, that was the regenerative braking. Hardly felt it as the throttle rolled off, but it did slow the bike down more than you would otherwise have got. We'll see how we go on this. I might be coming back to economy pretty quick. 86% remaining to here. So I've used 14% to go 13 kilometres. And I'm riding at 32 kilometres an hour. If I come back to economy, it'll only go at about 29. But somebody has put a lot of work in this they've added fines and they've used a grader and a roller. It's lovely. Oh, magnificent. Quite happy to leave it in sport mode and ride on this at 35. I did not expect this to be this good. If I was real trusting, or if I'd ridden or driven it before, I'd probably go up to 45 and see what it was like. But in this case, I'm trying to replicate early rides done with the old speed controller when this road wasn't safe to ride any more than 35 on, so we'll see how I go. Yeah, I don't know how the Americans are going to go now that they've got to look at every truck and every Winnebago and every caravan behind every SUV on every highway and byway and back road as a potential nest of attack drones that are capable of flying 5 or 10 miles. Come back to economy for this. And anything that parks within several miles of any Air Force base, or probably several other kinds of base in America, anything they can imagine that a drone might hit and make a mess of, they're going to be protecting it against whatever they can imagine. Still using 35 watt hours per kilometre to do 30 kilometres an hour in economy. Yeah, and apparently the Russian road network is kind of gridlocked because they are literally out there searching every bloody truck they can see in case it's more Ukrainian drones. And from what I can make out, China is still not playing the Americans' preferred game. They're not exporting any rare earths, and they're not exporting a whole lot of chips and other electronic components. And nobody wants to trade with anybody as mercurial as the Trump administration. On the other hand, as I understand it, some right-wing authoritarians did well in the Polish elections, and the Dutch neo-Nazi party, which in their most recent elections won the most votes out of any of the various parties, and therefore it had to be in a coalition for the other mob to form a government. It pulled out of the government. So Holland hasn't got a government at the moment. So apparently not all countries are taking their lead from Australia and Canada. Just about convinced to go back into sport mode up here. The extra 5 kilometres an hour might be worth it. And meanwhile, the American immigration and customs enforcement seem to be running around wearing masks, body armour, no identification, grabbing anybody on the streets who looks like they might be vaguely South American in origin or ancestry, and taking them away and detaining them. I'd say by this stage people from every European nation, as well as Canada and Australia and New Zealand, have spent days to weeks, and some of them nearly a month, in detention before being deported for simply trying to go to America to have a holiday or visit someone. They've now banned Chinese students from going to America, and in response, and this is interesting, in response to an Egyptian migrant who had permission to be in America, he was there, fully legally, he conducted an attack in Boulder, Colorado, and yelled "Free Palestine" at the end of his attacking. And because he did that, I think it might be 12 countries have been absolutely banned from entering the United States, and another 7, I think, have been put on a restricted entry list where they've got to bend down on their knees very hard and jump through some hoops to get there. But none of the 17 countries who've been, or 19 countries that have been banned or restricted, none of them are Egypt, which is where the bloke who conducted the attack came from. What those 19 countries are, or 22, whatever it is, what they are actually appearing in the figures are, they are the top 22 countries on a list of whose people come to America and then overstay their visa. Now, whether they go there on a tourist visa and stay there for 10 years, or whether they don't get their visa renewed and they're 2 days late leaving, I don't know. But according to Planet America on the ABC television YouTube channel, that's the one thing that links all of the countries who got banned or restricted from entering the US. They're the people who go there and overstay their visa. I don't think it'll be too long before the great writ of habeas corpus is abolished, first up for immigrants and then for everybody else. I think the reason Trump told his interviewer that he wasn't sure whether he was going to safeguard and uphold the Constitution because he wasn't sure if he had to, is because he's cognizant of the fact that the Supreme Court's given him absolute immunity for anything he does in his official position as president. And if he says that he doesn't feel obliged to uphold the Constitution because he's president, then he doesn't have to. Elon, meantime, reckons that he'd like to start a party in the middle because he reckons the Democrats are far too socialist and he reckons that the Republicans are far too conservative. He wants to run a middle party, and I'll lay a bet it'll be modelled after the technocracy party that his grandfather on his mother's side used to vote for. I might be wrong. 80% for 18 kilometres. We're allowed to roll to 33 going down here in economy. So it's pretty cunning in the way it limits your speed and limits the amount of power you use. But I've been to Deepwater at least 3 times on the bike. The first time I didn't use economy at all, and I was probably riding at 30 to 35. The second time, I think I rode in economy on the dirt going there, and half the way coming back, and in sport on the second half of the dirt. The third time I might have used economy both going and coming, because the road was getting pretty rough at that point. But I've done this 60 kilometre ride, and the first time I went back to my place and I got there with 23% remaining. Pretty sure the second time it was 25, and I think the third time it might have even been 28. So I'm going to chalk that up to the effect of using the economy setting on the dirt. So if this is as good as the old one, I should get somewhere between 25 and 28% of the battery remaining when I get home. If it's less efficient but more reliable, I may have less than 20% remaining when I get home. I'm surprised this rock mailbox is permitted by the authorities. according to the Traffic Act, you're not allowed to have anything like that in case someone runs into it at high speed and hurts themselves. But yeah, this smooth ride I'm having is an example of my local rates at work. And on that hinges a bit of a tale. For an awfully long time, the rates in Glen Innes have been quite reasonable. I pay what they call residential non-urban, which is the lowest form of rates you can pay. It's for a block that's big enough to put a house on, which my 100 acres is. Or 100 acres I pay rates on. I try not to think of it as mine. I am paid to be made responsible for it, but you know, you can't own land any more than a flea can own the dog it lives on. So I pay about $3 a day in rates, and that's including the Pastures Protection Board or Meat and Livestock Industry levy. I think there's about $850 council rates and $165 or so meat and livestock levy, so it's pretty close to $1,000, 365 days, call it $3 a day. To play about on YouTube, I have an Optus prepaid mobile phone account which costs me $3 a day. So I don't think my rates are such a hell of a big amount, but other people regard things differently, and you know, everybody's mileage may vary. The thing is, Glen Innes used to get about 50% of its operating costs. I'm glad I didn't meet him about here on the corner. About 50% of its operating costs from state and federal government grants, and they actually employ somebody with a PhD in bureaucracy to sit there in an office and apply for all the available grants that the federal and state government can provide. And as the economy has been doing not so very great since the COVID pandemic shutdown, there's been less money for the government to shell out, and all of a sudden they're cracking down on the local councils. Apparently, in order to maintain services, the council's going to have to increase its intake of money from the local ratepayers by about 58%. And okay, so that means I'm going to have to pay $4.50 or $5 a day for my council rates. Think about what it would have cost me to get a bloody grader and a road building crew to do up this road so I can go to Deepwater and buy a loaf of bread at the supermarket. I reckon the job they've done on this back road here, and this is the road I used to go to the dump, so even in my car and trailer I'd go on this road 4 or 6 times backwards and forwards each year, and on the motorbike I might do it once a month, you know. Got to ride the thing somewhere. At least there's not a whole lot of trucks on this one. The occasional cattle baron or sheep warrior in a 4-wheel drive going somewhere in a hurry. They're always in a hurry until they get into their 70s or 80s, and then they get real slow. But yeah, there's a lot of people reckon they can't possibly afford to have their rates go up that much. One person was complaining of, I think in response to somebody saying on a Facebook page, oh well, it all seems pretty reasonable. You know, they'd checked it out with someone who actually pays rates, and that person's opinion was pretty much in line with mine. And this other person chimed in and said, oh, boo-hoo, sob, sob, it's going to cost an extra $1,500 for us, you know. I'll have to go and get a third job to pay this. Well, I don't know how many hours you're going to work in your third job if it only pays $1,500 at the end of the year. But I'm pretty sure rates on a quarter-acre block in town, $815 would be the base rate, and then you'd start paying for all the services you get, like someone to collect your garbage, and someone to provide you with drinking water, and someone to take away your sewage, all sorts of stuff that you get when you're in town and you don't get when you're on residential non-urban. But I suppose if you're paying $2,000 or $1,500 rates on two different blocks, and that's going to go up by 58%, yeah, you might be looking at an extra $1,500. But just look at what it would cost if you had to provide all those services to yourself, for yourself, at your own expense. That's why cooperatives are a thing. That's why they work. And, you know, they're considered a good idea, but everybody is not completely stupid. %76% of a battery remaining 22 kilometres out. I probably should stop and do something about that, but hopefully I won't need that piece of road to be unencumbered when I'm on my way back, but it's a pretty bad spot to try and stop on a hill, on a corner, on a motorbike and play with a dead kangaroo, which has already been chewed up and is probably stuck to the road by now, if not ready to fall apart in your hands. When they're fresh enough, I do move them. But I think there's an awful lot of people who've become used to their rates being a sort of a token payment. They're not used to the idea that if council's going to provide such services, council's going to charge them for whatever it costs to provide those services. It is quite a picturesque little drive with the remnants of the eucalypt forest that used to be here. This is Yellow Box. Every year there's less and less big old trees. And by the phenomenon of shifting baseline, whatever people see when they're aged about 3, that's what they consider to be normal. They consider that is the pristine baseline against which everything else is measured. And they never consider what was there when their great-grandparents were about 3 years old. One of the funny things about having been the son of a 52-year-old when I was born is that I grew up hearing about how prolific the landscape was in terms of wildlife during the 1910s. Well, yeah, the teens onwards. Well, my father's expectations of what was living in the landscape were set before the Second World War. And when you're a kid, the stuff you receive from your parents is what you think is normal. But over the years, in order to preserve the fences, a hell of a lot of the big tall trees that used to be along the fence lines, as wind breaks and to provide a bit of shade, they've all been bulldozed. I really have difficulty believing what a different road this is to ride on compared to last time I was here. I spent $1,250 for a new set of off-road forks to replace the L1E standard street variety forks, which on the website, a set of new street forks is $500. A set of new off-road forks, like I said, $1,250. And I had to buy these forks that are on the bike now because this road was rough enough to the point that 1,000 kilometres into the ownership of the bike, having ridden to Deepwater I think once or twice, the front seals started to leak. If my rates had graded the road this smooth, I might not have needed the new forks, perhaps. But my theory on the rate rise, and as I told it to the Deputy Mayor the day before yesterday, is anybody who reckons that their business is going to go broke if their rates increase by 58% doesn't have much of a business model. It's more like they're flat out staving off bankruptcy. And it won't much matter at that point whether the rates go up or go down or stay what they are. Their business is on the way out. And with the reduction in global trade, which is more or less bound to happen with what Trump's tariffs are doing in suppressing global trade, I think an awful lot of businesses that sort of make sense when the economy is growing and everybody's got plenty of money and they don't much care what they spend on fripperies, such businesses will thrive in a good time and not so good in a hard time. And in the US, dear oh dear oh dear, it's as if nobody ever explained the multiplier effect to Trump, let alone the balanced budget multiplier effect. And essentially a multiplier effect suggests that if the government spends money, the sectors of the economy they give the money to, that means the money goes around and around and around, and you might get 1.8 or $2.5 worth of economic activity generated by each dollar the government spends. And particularly because of where the government spends extra money, if they have two balanced budgets in 2 consecutive years, and the second balanced budget's bigger than the first balanced budget, then on top of the background multiplier effect that government funding would occur or incur, there's a balanced budget multiplier effect. Nobody apparently explained to him that if you cut government spending by suddenly retrenching a third or a half or 2/3 of the people who work for the government, they stop spending. All the businesses who are used to receiving their trade stop receiving any income, and local economies all over the country start collapsing and shutting down and being declared bankrupt. And that means that those people can't get a job, and then they don't pay their mortgage, and then they lose their house. They're going to get a whole lot of people who are disgruntled. And then when you stop giving medical treatments and pensions to veterans because you're cutting back, then you get disgruntled people who've got the skills to do something about expressing their disgruntlement. And apparently because of the unsavoury employment prospects everywhere else in the economy. Maybe 70%, 60% of the people in the US military are African American or Latinos. They've grown up in a low income family, and what they're interested in doing, 72%. And we're at Deepwater. It's pretty good. 26 kilometres from home. So it seems that about 75% of African American men have difficulty in shaving. I'll just let these cars go past rather than have them up my arse. To the degree that if they try to shave with a razor, they get what they call razor bumps. And these razor bumps get cut the next day, and then they get infected, and then they get all manner of skin difficulties. And they're not much good as soldiers when they've got infected pustules on their face. So, for 40, 50 years, the way they deal with such a situation in the US military is they give them a shaving waiver and they let them have a scissor-clipped beard close to the skin. Not good enough for Pete Hegseth, the bloke who carries an American flag in his top pocket so he can blow his nose on the stars and stripes. So they're cancelling all the shaving waivers. So a whole lot of African Americans who've been in the military and had long careers and all the rest of it, they've all got a choice between having scabby infested, pus encrusted faces that they drag a razor across every day, or getting out early. And then with the cutbacks in the veterans' benefits and affairs and the pensions and all the rest of it, then they can go and be impoverished and unemployed in the sinking of the economy. I just don't think these people have thought through what they say they want to do. There's just a huge lot of short-term thinking, you know, like one wonders what Elon Musk thought he was bloody doing. It looked pretty clever there for a while. The blind Freddy could have seen the two narcissists sniffing around each other's bums and turn out badly and turn out badly pretty bloody quickly. As it did. Not that I'm expecting to talk to anybody out here or see anybody out here, but it's just a nice little circular turn around in Deepwater. So I think there's going to be an awful lot of disgruntled, impoverished, homeless people getting around America on the streets, and I truly believe that the right-wing neoconservatives have the idea that they're going to be able to crack down on them and make a lot of money as private security companies and private prisons lock up anybody who disagrees with the dear leader. Fairly certain that is the plan. Not entirely certain how well it's going to work for them. A lot of right-wing gun nuts have been saying it for a long time, but they didn't have privately owned firearms to much of a degree in Germany when things started to get cracked down on. Trying to crack down on the Americans might be a very different thing in the doing than it is in the thinking about. Right, that's 29 kilometres. kilometres, 32 watt hours per kilometre, and we're still doing 45 at 68%. It's having fun. Quite the pleasant little ride. And my particular plan to test the battery involves, on the spur of the moment, not stopping for a loaf of bread here. I'll pick that up in town tomorrow when I go and do my washing. But the Deepwater Brewery seemed to be open, and hopefully I can get a cup of coffee there. And that would be a more or less adventurous thing to do. If you're a toothless, tasteless, mangy looking recovering zombie playing around on an electric motorbike on the King's birthday weekend. I still have trouble getting my head around that idea. My luck, I'll probably show up just as they're shutting. All right, they are not shut. There we go. 31 kilometres, 66% of a battery remaining. 4672 kilometres, 55 minutes. Average speed 33, max speed 46. Yeah. 32 watt hours per kilometre it says. I'm pretty happy with that. It means that I should get home with a slightly longer ride than I've done before, because last time I didn't have the extra little distance from the turn off to here. So, warbles on a lot to YouTube. Welcome to the Deepwater Brewery. Ciao.